Hi guys, we'll go over a quick review of Chapter 19 here, all about the reproductive system. First we will start with the male side of things, then female, and then the very last slide we'll talk about the sexually transmitted infections. So first of all, with male, the scrotum is the outside covering. It's a protective factor, and it houses two organs, the testes, the right and left. The reason that these need to be below the body and kind of outside the core is testes need to be 3 degrees lower than their average body temperature. If they get too hot, that affects the amount of sperm that can be produced and how testosterone works. So we do need to respond to temperature changes, which is why testes will move up when the person is outside or in a cold environment, and then drop again when someone's in a hotter environment. So we need to maintain that 3 degree lower than body temperature for normal function. So here's what we're looking at. The scrotum is the outside covering for each of those testes. And we'll move on up through the rest of the organs here. The testes are the primary male reproductive organ. So testes are the male equivalent to the female ovary. Testes produce sperm and testosterone. Very important. They are divided into little lobules, which are just a bunch of little tubes, tiny little tubes called seminiferous tubules. And it's all wound up, kind of like the intestines that we talked about in the digestive system. They're just wound up together. And the last thing on this slide, the interstitial cells, those are the things that actually produce the hormone testosterone. So if we take a look at a little bit closer, here are those seminiferous tubules we were mentioning, kind of wound back and forth. And within those tubules is where we make the testosterone. Here's an actual cadaver, and you can see the scrotum is the outside that's all the way around, and it's been cut away on this side, so you can see just the one testis on this side. Alright, sticking with the male side of things, we have the penis, which is the outside organ. It's the equivalent of a clitoris in a female. It's the copulatory organ, which means that's the part that makes the reproductive system in humans. The penis is responsible for delivering sperm, and we think back to the urinary system, it's also responsible for delivering urine outside the body, which is something that is completely opposite the female. We have two separate tracts altogether. The penis is attached at the root. The whole thing is a shaft, and then the very end is called a glans. And on the glans you'll find the prepuce, which is just another word for foreskin, and in some males, in some traditions, that is what is cut in infancy. The two muscles that are inside are called the corpus spongiosum and the corpora cavernosum. So let's look at those two muscles on this slide. They are colored in blue right here, this blue spongy looking material. You'll see one smaller, kind of thinner along the bottom of the penis, or the inferior side, and then the superior side actually has that wider muscle on top, which is why the penis can become erect. As those spongy areas fill with blood, it moves upward. Alright, so let's follow that sperm and how it comes together, and then how it leaves the body. The first part is the epididymis. That's a coiled up tube. In this structure, we have immature sperm. So if we were to release sperm from this area, it would not have the capability of making reaching an egg and then making a fetus. It has to mature before it can do its job. So the sperm kind of hangs out in the epididymis while it's getting to that mature point. After that, we have the ductus deferens, which is also called the vas deferens in some textbooks. This is just a passageway that sperm can move into the ejaculatory duct. So until there's any stimulation, the sperm is hanging out in this little passageway. The last part, the urethra, which is the shared portion that is shared with the urine, that's the last part that the sperm travels through before it's leaving the body. So let's go over that. We're starting in epididymis way down here, inside the testes. From there, we're going to go up this track called the vas deferens. We follow that up and around. It goes around the prostate, and from here, when there is ejaculation, that's when it's released from this ejaculatory duct and then down the urethra to exit the end of the penis. So besides those areas, we have a couple glands that are helping out with this whole process. The seminal vesicles are on the posterior bladder wall. The secretions from these seminal vesicles account for 60% of the semen. The prostate gland, we hear a lot about that on different medications and their advertisements, but the prostate gland is mostly important for the enzymes that it releases, and the enzymes account for about 1/3 of the semen and gives it that milky white color. The bulbourethral glands are a much smaller portion of the semen, but they're very important because they neutralize acidity. And in women, we have a lot of acid within the vagina, so if the male sperm was not able to get through that acid area, it would never be able to meet the egg and then live past that point. So it's very important that those bulbourethral glands are helping out. Let's take another look. This is kind of a superior to inferior view. We have the bladder up here, the prostate. From the testes, we have that tract that goes up and around, like we saw before, and then through that prostate gland all the way down the urethra and out. This bottom picture is kind of interesting. It shows a cross cut of the shaft, and you can see how much of that area is muscle. Very kind of interesting look. So the physiology part here, we have the male sexual response. So erection and enlargement of those muscle tissues that we saw are very important. If that doesn't happen, we cannot have ejaculation, and if we don't have ejaculation, the semen will never leave the body. Spermatogenesis is a word you need to know. If you take it apart, we have sperm and then genesis, so it's the making of sperm. All of that occurs within the seminiferous tubules, and as we know, the sperm is a gamete, and that's 1/2 of a body cell. The whole thing here, so all of this reproductive stuff is regulated by hormones. If you think back to the hormone chapter, we had gonadotropins, the FSH, LH, and those lead to testosterone. So review that if you need to, but we have already talked about that. I'm going to move forward to the female part of things. So first of all, the reproductive organ is the primary is the ovary. So let's look at that. Females have 2 ovaries, right and left, just like the right and left testes in males. They produce the gametes, which are eggs in this case, and also hormones. So very similar functions as a testes, just producing different things. The ovarian follicles, similar to the seminiferous tubules, are where the immature eggs are kept. So just like the immature sperm is kept in the males, we have immature eggs in the females. During ovulation, one of those mature eggs is going to be released, and let's look at what that looks like. Here's one ovary, and as one of these eggs is released, just like right here, that is a mature egg that's released. It will float down into the fallopian tubes and on its way out. So the duct system, the fallopian tubes that I just mentioned, can also be called uterine tubes. They receive that mature egg from an ovary. The eggs will move down the tube into the uterus, which is a very hollow muscular organ. This is where a fertilized egg would become a fetus and a baby. If so, you will result in a long pregnancy. If it's not fertilized, then the uterine wall will collapse, as we see in a couple slides, and you'll have bleeding in a menstrual cycle. Lastly, the vagina is the passageway for an infant. That's where the menstrual blood will be released from the body, and that's where sperm will enter the body. Keep in mind that this is not the same as the males, where they have a shared tube for their urine and sperm. Females have a separate area, so vaginas for infants and unused eggs, and that's completely different than the urethra, which houses and moves along our urine. So again, just to go over that, we have the ovaries here. They release the eggs into these uterine or fallopian tubes, into the uterus, which is a thick, look how thick that muscle is, muscular wall, and then down through the vagina on the exterior part of your body. So on the external side, much fewer things to talk about here compared to the males, but the vulva is also called the pudendum. That includes all the things you can see from the outside of a female. So the mons pubis, labia, clitoris, and the glandular openings. Let's look at that. The mons pubis is this fatty area covering the pubic bone, and that's a protection issue. We have the labia majora and minora on the outside that are, again, protecting this opening. And the vagina itself is, again, separate from the urethra. All right, let's keep going. All right, in females, the mammary glands are very important. They are present in both sexes, but they do not function in males. So during the end of a pregnancy and after the infant is born, these modified sweat glands will produce milk, and that's because of prolactin. Think back to the endocrine chapter. You'll see that there are several different passageways where that milk can enter the nipple and then be consumed by the child. While we're on breast, I'm sure some of you have had mammograms or maybe have older relatives who have. An uncomfortable procedure, but if we compare a normal, we'll see those glands and ducts inside in a nice bright blue. If there was a malignancy, it would come up as a very different color because those cells are reproducing at a very rapid rate. All right, physiology. Word you need to know here is oogenesis or oogenesis. That's how we make an egg, just like spermatogenesis in males. A female is born with all the eggs she'll ever have. That's kind of an interesting fact because males constantly produce sperm throughout their entire life, but females, when they're born, have a certain number that is what they have. They will never produce any more. During ovulation, a few eggs are released each month if this is a normal, healthy menstruation. Only one of those eggs is going to go through meiosis, which makes it half of a human egg. And the egg will only complete that meiosis if a sperm meets it and then penetrates the outside. So if you do not have that fertilization from a sperm, the female will go through the ovarian cycle. It's about every month, so some sources say 28 to 35 days is the average. There's two phases. The follicular phase, that stays 1 through 14. The follicle is growing, getting ready for fertilization. The ovulation occurs when that ovary ruptures and the egg is released into the fallopian tubes. And the luteal phase, days 14 through 28, that's what happens if the egg is not fertilized. The uterine wall collapses and then is released through the vagina so that the uterine wall can then prepare itself the next month for a possible pregnancy. Lastly, as you know, hormonal regulation is very important in females, just as it is in males. I encourage you to look through the next few slides on your own, and see you in class.